The needle moved through fabric with practiced precision, each stitch perfect, each thread pulled tight. Natalie Wayne's hands never trembled anymore. 13 years of survival had burned the fear out of them. But today, as she embroidered the royal crest of Valdrin onto ceremonial banners, something inside her chest cracked open, like ice breaking in spring. The golden lion, the 3 crowns, the motto in ancient script, "Blood answers to blood." She was stitching the symbols of her own stolen kingdom onto cloth that would hang in the palace where her parents were murdered. Around her in the cramped seamstress shop, 6 other women worked in silence, broken only by the whisper of thread through fabric and the occasional sharp intake of breath when a needle found flesh instead of cloth. They didn't know that Nell the threadmaker, the quiet girl with sad gray eyes and permanent ink stains on her fingers, was Princess Natalie Elise Wayne, the heir everyone believed had burned to ash 13 years ago. The morning light filtering through grimy windows caught the dust motes dancing above their work, making everything look slightly unreal, slightly dreamlike. Natalie's fingers moved automatically, creating perfect golden lions that would roar silently from ceremonial banners. Her hands were callous now, rough from years of labor that should never have touched royal skin. The threadbare brown dress she wore hung loose on her frame. It had belonged to someone else once, like everything in her life now belonged to someone else. Beneath that dress, hidden on a thin silver chain that never left her neck, her mother's sapphire ring pressed against her breastbone with each breath. The weight of it had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. But today, creating symbols of the crown her uncle had stolen, she felt it like a burning brand against her skin. "Nell, you're bleeding." The voice belonged to Martha, the oldest seamstress, her face lined with 50 years of squinting at fine work in poor light. Natalie glanced down. A spot of crimson bloomed on the golden lion's mane, where her needle had slipped and found her thumb instead. She watched the blood spread into the fabric, thinking how appropriate it was. Blood on the stolen throne, blood on her family's symbols, blood everywhere except where justice demanded it should be. "I'm fine," she said quietly, sucking the wound and returning to her work. Her voice sounded strange even to her own ears, hollow, distant, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Maybe it did. Maybe Princess Natalie had died in those flames 13 years ago, and Nell the threadmaker was all that remained. Around her, the other women exchanged glances. They were good people, these seamstresses. Sarah with her 6 children and a husband who drank away his wages. Young Annie, barely 16, saving every copper coin for a dowry her family couldn't afford. Old Martha, whose arthritic hands shook more each season, but who refused to stop working because her pension had been reallocated by Harold Bradley's new taxation laws. They'd taken Natalie in 5 years ago when she'd shown up at their door with needle-calloused hands and a letter of reference forged in her own careful script. They'd taught her their trade secrets, shared their meager meals, covered for her when tax collectors came asking questions. They were her family now in all the ways that mattered, and they had no idea who slept in the tiny room above their shop. The door burst open with a crack that made everyone jump. Mistress Hedda, the shop owner, stood in the doorway with her face flushed from climbing the stairs too quickly. She was a large woman, kind-hearted but sharp-tongued, and she looked more rattled than Natalie had ever seen her. "The banners are needed today," Hedda announced breathlessly. "Not tomorrow, as we were told. Today, before sunset, for the Founders' Day celebration." A collective groan rose from the seamstresses. They'd been told they had until tomorrow evening. Now they had hours instead of days. "And someone must deliver them to the palace," Hedda continued. "They're sending a cart at midday. Whoever goes will need to pass through the new security checkpoints. They're thorough." Silence fell over the shop like a shroud. No one wanted to go near the palace, near Harold Bradley's guards with their hard eyes and harder hands. Stories circulated through the slums of Ashford about people who'd been stopped at checkpoints and never seen again. Dissenters, they were called, traitors who spoke against the crown. "I'll go." Natalie's voice cut through the tension before she'd consciously decided to speak. Every head turned toward her. Martha's weathered face creased with concern. "Nell, child, you don't know what you're saying. Those guards, I know." Natalie met her eyes steadily. "But someone has to deliver them. Might as well be me." What she didn't say was that she needed to see the palace, needed to walk through those gates and remember why she'd survived when everyone she loved had died, needed to look at the stones where her mother had bled out and her father had choked on poison disguised as plague, needed to remind herself that hiding in the slums, invisible and safe, was betraying every person who died to keep her alive. The memory hit without warning, the way it always did. Flames, screaming. Her mother's voice cutting through the chaos. "Stay quiet, stay hidden, promise me." The weight of Queen Isabel's body falling across her in the root cellar, shielding her even in death. The taste of smoke so thick it coated her throat like tar. Dr. Marcus Whitmore's gentle hands pulling her from beneath the rubble hours later, his face streaked with soot and tears. Captain Thomas Ashford lifting her in his arms, running through underground catacombs, while behind them the palace burned and people died and her entire world ended in fire and lies. She blinked, and the seamstress shop came back into focus. 13 years later, and the smoke still lived in her lungs. "Are you certain, Nell?" Hedda's voice was softer now, concerned. Natalie nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She returned to her embroidery, finishing the final banner with steady hands, while around her the other women worked in renewed silence. The golden lion stared up at her with thread eyes that saw nothing and everything. By the time the palace cart arrived, the sun had climbed to its zenith and the cramped shop had become an oven. Natalie helped load the banners carefully, folding each one with precision, while trying to ignore the way her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd adjusted her hair carefully to hide the distinctive mark behind her left ear, the crown-shaped birthmark that marked true Wayne heirs. Her mother's sapphire ring stayed hidden beneath her dress, warm against her skin. The cart driver barely looked at her. Just another poor seamstress making a delivery, invisible in the way the poor always were to those with power. The capital streets of Valdrin unfolded before them like a map of broken promises. Natalie remembered these streets from childhood, remembered them filled with laughter and merchants hawking wares and children playing games between the vendor stalls. Now they were silent and tense. Herald soldiers stood on every corner, their armor gleaming in the afternoon sun, their hands never far from their sword hilts. People hurried past with their eyes down, speaking in whispers that died whenever soldiers drew near. This was what 13 years of Harold Bradley's rule had created. A kingdom that had once thrived now cowered under the weight of security measures and necessary protocols and all the other words tyrants used to justify oppression. The palace loomed ahead, its white stone walls seeming to glow in the sunlight. From a distance, it looked exactly as she remembered. Beautiful, majestic, eternal. But as they drew closer, Natalie could see the differences. Guard towers that hadn't existed before, barricades at every entrance, and everywhere, soldiers watching with the kind of paranoia that came from serving a man who'd stolen his throne and knew it could be stolen back. The checkpoint was worse than she'd imagined. 3 guards examined every person entering, checking papers, searching bags, asking questions designed to trip up anyone who didn't belong. Natalie kept her posture bent, her eyes down, her hands rough and visible. Just another seamstress. Just another invisible poor person bringing goods to their betters. "Papers," one guard demanded. She handed over the work order, carefully folded. Her heart was beating so loud she was certain he could hear it. He examined the document, his eyes flicking between the paper and her face. For one terrible moment she thought he saw something, some shadow of the princess she'd been, some echo of royal blood that couldn't be completely hidden by poverty and time. Then he grunted and waved her through. Natalie walked through the palace gates on trembling legs, carrying banners embroidered with her family's symbols into the place where her family had been murdered. The irony was so sharp it felt like a blade between her ribs. The palace courtyard bustled with servants preparing for tonight's celebration. No one paid attention to one more seamstress delivering goods. She was shown to a receiving room where she carefully laid out the banners for inspection. A steward examined them briefly, nodded approval, and dismissed her. It should have been over then. She should have turned and left, grateful to escape unrecognized. But as she crossed the courtyard, a flash of movement caught her eye. A woman stood at a high palace window, her hand pressed against the glass. Even from this distance, Natalie recognized her, Lady Helena Greymont, her mother's former lady-in-waiting, the woman who had braided Natalie's hair and told her stories and sung lullabies when nightmares came. Their eyes met across the distance. Helena's face went white as death. Her hand clutched at the window frame as if only that kept her standing. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Helena's gaze dropped to Natalie's chest, where, Natalie realized with horror, her mother's sapphire ring had slipped free from her dress and caught the sunlight, sending blue fire dancing across the cobblestones. Helena's lips formed words Natalie couldn't hear. Then the older woman turned sharply from the window and disappeared into the palace's depths. Natalie's hand shook as she tucked the ring back beneath her dress. 13 years of careful invisibility, shattered in a moment. She didn't know if Helena was friend or enemy now. Didn't know if the woman would report her to Harold or what? Try to help? After 13 years of silence, what loyalties remained? She walked toward the gate on legs that felt disconnected from her body, every step an eternity. Any moment she expected guards to seize her, to drag her before Harold, to end the life she'd barely managed to keep. But she made it through the checkpoint, made it into the cart, made it back through the silent streets to the seamstress shop. Only as she climbed the stairs to her tiny room did she realize a servant had pressed something into her palm at the palace gate, a folded note sealed with wax. Her hands trembled as she examined it in the fading afternoon light. The wax seal was broken, but she could still make out the emblem pressed into it, a needle and thread crossed over a crown, the symbol of her mother's private embroidery society, a symbol that should have died 13 years ago with everyone who knew its meaning. The note inside contained 4 words in handwriting she didn't recognize. Tonight. Crypt. Come alone. Her carefully maintained invisibility had just shattered. The only question was whether the person who'd found her wanted to crown her or kill her. 13 years of hiding, 13 years of silence, all ending because someone recognized her mother's ring. Natalie stood in the cramped room above the seamstress shop that she called home, holding the note that might be a summons to her death. Come alone could mean trap, but it could also mean hope. And after 13 years of surviving when everyone she loved had died, she was tired of just surviving. She wanted to live, or die trying. The sun had set hours ago, painting Ashford's slums in shades of darkness, broken only by the occasional torch on street corners where Harold's soldiers stood watch. Natalie dressed carefully in her darkest clothes, a threadbare black cloak that had belonged to Martha's late husband, soft-soled boots that made no sound on cobblestones, her mother's sapphire ring tucked safely beneath her dress. The small blade she kept hidden in her room, a gift from a grateful merchant whose daughter she'd taught to read, found its way into her belt. The cathedral bells tolled 11 as she slipped from the seamstress shop. 1 hour until midnight, 1 hour to cross half the capital without being caught by patrol guards who'd been told to watch for anything suspicious during Founder's Day preparations. The streets were a maze of shadows and danger. Natalie moved like smoke, pressing herself against walls when torchlight approached, ducking into alleys when the sound of boots on stone grew too close. 13 years of poverty had taught her how to be invisible in ways her palace upbringing never could have. The poor learned to move through the world without being seen, because being noticed meant being questioned, and being questioned meant trouble. The cathedral rose above Valdrin's merchant quarter like a monument to everything that had been and might never be again. It was older than the Wayne bloodline, older than the current royal dynasty, built 400 years ago when the kingdom was still young and the throne changed hands through strength of arms rather than inheritance. Its stone walls had witnessed the crowning of every legitimate ruler since, and beneath those walls, in crypts, dug deep into bedrock, lay the bones of kings and queens whose names had been forgotten by everyone except scholars and the dead. Natalie approached from the east, where a service entrance used by priests stood half hidden behind overgrown ivy. The door was unlocked, or had been unlocked recently. Her hand went to her blade as she slipped inside. The cathedral's interior was darkness broken by votive candles that cast dancing shadows across stone pillars carved with scenes from Valdrin's history. She could see her family's crest among them, the golden lion, the 3 crowns, the motto that had seemed so noble once, blood answers to blood. Now it felt like a threat. The entrance to the crypts was behind the altar, concealed by a tapestry that depicted the first Wayne king receiving his crown from ancient priests who'd believed that bloodlines carried divine right. Natalie pushed it aside and found stone steps descending into earth that smelled of age and secrets. Torchlight flickered somewhere below. Voices, low and urgent, echoed off stone walls. Her hand tightened on her blade as she descended, each step taking her deeper into a place where Wayne heirs had been crowned for 4 centuries, where the bones of her ancestors waited in silent judgment. The crypt opened into a chamber carved from living rock, its walls lined with niches where the dead slept in stone sarcophagi. 20 people stood in the flickering torchlight, their faces shadowed but their postures tense with anticipation. Commoners in rough clothes stood beside minor nobles in faded finery. A blacksmith with soot-stained hands, a merchant woman whose jewelry had seen better days, a young soldier in civilian clothes with a deserter's haunted eyes, and at their center, Lady Helena Greymont, looking older than Natalie remembered, but with the same fierce intelligence burning in her eyes. "Princess." Helena's voice broke on the word. She moved forward and Natalie saw tears streaming down her weathered face. "We thought you died in the fires. The plague took so many." "Harold's plague was convenient," Natalie said quietly, not moving from the shadows. "Too convenient." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Around the chamber, people shifted, exchanged glances. They'd been living with Harold's lies for 13 years, and hearing them called lies aloud felt dangerous even here, in the darkness beneath the cathedral. "The crown's memory," Helena said, gesturing to the assembled group. "We've been searching for you for 13 years, Princess, waiting, preparing, hoping that somewhere, somehow, you'd survived." "Why?" The question came out harder than Natalie intended. "Why wait for me? Why not find another heir, another Wayne cousin? Why pin your hopes on a girl who might be dead?" A young man stepped forward from the shadows, and Natalie's breath caught. He had his father's face, the same strong jaw, the same determined eyes, the same scar on his left cheek from a training accident. But where Captain Thomas Ashford had been in his 40s when he died, this man was barely past 25, with anger and relief warring across his features. "My father carried you through blood and fire to freedom," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "He died believing you'd return and set things right. I've spent 13 years waiting for a ghost, and now you're here, sewing banners in the slums like none of it mattered." The accusation hit harder than any blade. Natalie forced herself to meet his eyes, this man who carried his father's face and his father's sacrifice like a weight on his shoulders. "Your father died to save a terrified child," she said quietly. "I was 11 years old, Thomas. What did you expect me to do? Storm the palace with a toy, sword and righteous fury? I survived. That's what your father died to ensure. I survived. And did nothing." Thomas Ashford Jr.'s hands clenched at his sides. "While we built a resistance, while we risked everything trying to expose Harold's crimes, while people died fighting for your memory, you hid." "I lived," Natalie corrected, something cold settling into her voice. "There's a difference between surviving and hiding, and you don't get to judge which one I chose when you don't know what I've endured." The tension in the crypt was thick enough to choke on. Helena stepped between them, her hands raised in placation. "We need each other," she said firmly. "Thomas, your anger is understandable, but we've found her. That's what matters. Princess, Thomas has spent his entire adult life building this network. Without him, we wouldn't exist. Without you, we have no hope of legitimacy." Natalie wanted to argue, wanted to defend her choices, but Helena's next words stopped her cold. "And we have proof of Harold's crimes, proof that will turn the kingdom against him if we can present it publicly." She produced a sealed document from a hidden pocket in her cloak, its edges yellowed with age, but the wax seal intact. Even in the torchlight, Natalie recognized her family's physician's sigil pressed into the wax. "Dr. Whitmore," she whispered. "He wrote this the night before Harold executed him," Helena said, placing the document in Natalie's trembling hands. "Every detail of that night. The poison used, nightshade kiss, a slow death that mimics plague fever, the witnesses present, the exact timeline, even the words Harold spoke as your father died." Natalie broke the seal with hands that shook. The physician's careful handwriting covered pages of parchment, each word meticulously recorded, each detail damning. She read her father's final moments described in clinical terms, read about her mother begging for mercy that never came, read about an 11-year-old princess being hunted through palace corridors while her family burned, and at the end, in handwriting that had begun to tremble, "This letter is your proof, and my last act of loyalty. Princess Natalie, if you read this, you survived. Make that survival mean something. Show them truth. Make them remember what we were before fear ruled us." "He died for this," Natalie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Many have died for this," Thomas said quietly, some of his anger fading into grief. "The question is whether you're willing to live for it." Before Natalie could answer, Helena spoke again, and her words carried a weight that made the torchlight seem to flicker in response. "There's something you need to understand about your bloodmark, Princess, something your parents would have told you when you came of age." Natalie's hand went instinctively to the crown-shaped mark behind her left ear. "It identifies Wayne heirs. I know." "It's more than that," Helena said. "The Wayne bloodmark is a magical seal that activates at age 25. When it does, you'll be able to sense deception within the palace walls. More than that, when you speak truth before the throne, everyone present will physically feel it. No lies can hide, no propaganda can obscure. It's ancient magic built into the throne itself to prevent usurpation." The implications hit Natalie like a physical blow. When does it activate? "On your 25th birthday." Helena's eyes held hers, "which is 3 days from now." Silence fell over the crypt like a shroud. 3 days, 72 hours. After that, Harold's lies would burn in the mouths of everyone who heard them. After that, no amount of propaganda or military might could hide the truth of what he'd done. "That's why he's hunted me so desperately," Natalie breathed. "That's why he's never stopped searching. He knew this was coming." "And there's more you need to know," Helena said, her voice softening with something that might have been compassion or might have been warning. "Harold has a daughter, Princess Isabel Bradley. She's 16 years old." The name hit Natalie like a slap. "He named her after my mother?" "Guilt or mockery. We've never been certain which," Helena admitted. "But she's a good girl, Princess. Kind, charitable, beloved by the common people. She has no idea what her father did. She believes Harold saved the kingdom from plague and weak leadership. She's innocent." Natalie felt something twist in her chest. An innocent girl raised on lies, about to have her entire world destroyed when the truth came out. A girl who'd done nothing wrong except be born to a murderer. "She looks like your mother," Helena added quietly. "The resemblance is striking. Whether that haunts Harold or pleases him, I couldn't say." Before Natalie could process this, a man near the back of the chamber spoke up. Lord Pemberton. She recognized him, one of her father's minor council members. "3 of Harold's current council witnessed the murders," he said. "Myself, Lady Ashcroft, and Lord Philip Greymont. We've lived with that guilt for 13 years. Lady Ashcroft and I are prepared to testify publicly when the time comes, if you can guarantee our family's protection." "And Lord Greymont?" Natalie asked, though something cold in her gut already knew the answer. The silence that followed was damning. Helena's face had gone pale as death, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Philip is my husband, and he's been Harold's spy in our network for 8 years. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Helena's face went white as Thomas reached for his sword. "He knows," Natalie whispered. "Harold knows I'm alive. He knows exactly where I am." As if in answer, the sound of marching boots echoed through the cathedral above. Dozens of them. Hundreds. The crypt's secret entrance. Not so secret after all. Thomas grabbed her arm. "We run, now!" But Natalie stood frozen, staring at the ancient Wayne crest carved into the stone wall, glowing faintly in the torchlight. In 3 days, that mark on her skin would make her unstoppable. The question was whether she'd survive the next 3 hours. There are moments in every life where time splits into before and after. For Natalie Wayne, that moment came as Harold Bradley's soldiers poured into the cathedral crypt with swords drawn and orders to bring her back alive, or bring back her head as proof of death. Either would serve Harold's purposes. Either would end the threat to his stolen throne. The only question was whether the lost heir would die like her parents, surrounded by flames and broken promises, or whether she'd survive long enough to see justice done. "Move!" Thomas shoved Natalie toward a side passage as the first soldiers burst into the crypt chamber. Steel rang against steel as the resistance fighters threw themselves into combat, buying precious seconds with their blood. Helena grabbed Natalie's hand, pulling her through passages so narrow they had to turn sideways, through darkness lit only by the older woman's shaking torch. Behind them, screams echoed off stone walls, men dying, women fighting. The sound of Harold's soldiers cutting down people who'd waited 13 years for this moment. "There's a tunnel," Helena gasped, her breath coming in ragged pulls. "Old sewer system, opens in Ashford. We can—" A soldier appeared ahead of them, sword raised. Thomas materialized from the darkness and drove his blade through the man's throat before he could shout warning. The body fell with a wet thump that would haunt Natalie's nightmares. "Keep moving," Thomas commanded, his father's determination written across his blood-splattered face. They ran through passages that stank of centuries of waste and rot, splashing through water that Natalie tried not to think about. Helena stumbled, and Natalie caught her, feeling warm wetness on the older woman's side. "You're hurt." "I'm alive." Helena's voice was tight with pain. "That's more than many of us can say tonight. Move, Princess, 3 days. You just need to survive 3 more days." 3 days felt like 3 lifetimes when every breath might be your last. They emerged in Ashford slums as dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and gold. Thomas pulled them into a safe house, a butcher's shop whose owner owed the resistance a debt. Helena collapsed against a wall, her face gray with blood loss. "Scatter," Thomas ordered the handful of fighters who'd escaped with them. "Different safe houses. Meet tomorrow at the old mill. We regroup. We plan. We finish this." But as the sun climbed higher, it became clear that Harold had other plans. In the palace throne room, Harold Bradley stood at a window overlooking his kingdom, with hands that trembled despite his best efforts to still them. He was 47 years old and looked older, the weight of 13 years of lies and paranoia having carved lines into his face that made him appear ancient. "She's in Ashford," Lord Philip Greymont reported, his voice carefully neutral despite the betrayal of his own wife still fresh. "Surrounded by commoners. My sources say she's wounded, or someone with her is. They've gone to ground." Harold turned from the window. His daughter Isabel stood near the throne, 16 and beautiful, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd inherited her mother's features, but Harold's calculating intelligence, a dangerous combination. "Surround the district," Harold said quietly. "No one in or out." "Father, that's 50,000 people," Isabel said, her voice carrying just the right note of worry. "Surely there's another way to—" "There is no other way." Harold moved to a cabinet, unlocking it with a key he wore always around his neck. Inside, 3 vials of amber liquid caught the morning light. "Do you know what this is?" Philip Greymont's face went pale. "The plague, the real plague from 13 years ago. My lord, you said all samples were destroyed." "I said many things 13 years ago, most of them lies." Harold lifted one vial, watching the liquid slide like honey down the glass. "Release this in Ashford's water supply, and 50,000 people die screaming within days. The lost princess dies with them. No blood mark activation, no threat to the throne, just another tragic plague outbreak." "And if she surrenders?" Isabel asked quietly. Harold met his daughter's eyes and saw his own ruthlessness reflected there. "Then we execute her publicly. Either way, this ends at dawn tomorrow." That same dawn, 500 royal soldiers formed a ring of steel around the district. Natalie woke to Thomas shaking her shoulder, his face grim. "They've surrounded us, no one in or out. Harold's given you until dawn to surrender or—" He didn't finish, didn't need to. Helena, bandaged and pale but conscious, gripped Natalie's hand. "Let me negotiate. Philip might—" "Philip betrayed you," Natalie said gently. "He won't show mercy now." "Then we fight our way out," Thomas insisted. "I have 37 resistance fighters scattered through Ashford. We can break through, get you to—" "Where?" Natalie asked. "Where can I run that Harold won't follow? Where can I hide for 3 more days with an entire kingdom searching?" She stood, her decision made. "I won't let 50,000 people die for me. I'm going out there." "That's suicide," Thomas said flatly. "Maybe. Or maybe it's the only choice that matters." She walked through Ashford streets as the sun climbed higher, past the seamstress shop where she'd worked, past the baker who'd given her bread when she had no coin, past the children she'd taught to read in the brief hours between survival and exhaustion. Every face she passed was someone she'd lived among for 13 years. Every person was someone Harold would kill without hesitation. The soldiers formed a wall at the district's edge, swords drawn, faces hard. Their commander, a grizzled veteran named Marcus Cole, raised his hand for silence. "Natalie Wayne," he called, "or whoever you claim to be, you will surrender now or this district burns." Natalie stepped forward, her hands raised, her mother's sapphire ring catching the morning light. "I'm here. Let them go." But before Commander Cole could respond, something impossible happened. Martha stepped out from the crowd behind Natalie. The old seamstress, with her arthritic hands and fierce heart, planted herself between Natalie and the soldiers. "You think she'll surrender for us?" Martha's voice carried across the sudden silence. "We've lived beside Nell for 13 years. She mended my daughter's only dress when we had no coin. She shared her bread when we had none. You think we'll let you take her?" Sarah emerged next with her 6 children clinging to her skirts. Then Annie, barely 16. Then the baker, the butcher, the candle maker, the washerwoman. One by one, hundreds of people stepped forward, forming a human wall between Natalie and Harold's soldiers. "We know who she is," someone shouted from the crowd. "Princess Natalie Wayne, rightful queen, and she's ours." "Stand aside," Commander Cole ordered, but his voice had lost its certainty. "By order of King Harold." "Harold Bradley is a murderer and a usurper." Thomas Ashford Jr. emerged from the crowd, and behind him came not 37 fighters, but 3,000 people armed with whatever they could find. Tools, stones, kitchen knives, the weapons of people who had nothing left to lose. "And if you want Princess Natalie, you'll have to go through all of us." Commander Cole faced an impossible choice: order his 500 soldiers to massacre thousands of civilians, creating martyrs that would spark rebellion across the entire kingdom, or retreat and face Harold's wrath for failing. He chose survival. "Fall back," he commanded. "All units fall back to the palace." As the soldiers withdrew, Natalie stood in the center of Ashford, surrounded by 50,000 people who just declared themselves her subjects, not through blood or law or ancient magic, but through 13 years of shared bread and mended dresses and quiet kindness when the world was cruel. Her power wasn't the blood mark, she realized. It was this. It had always been this. By midday of the second day before her birthday, Lord Pemberton and Lady Ashcroft stood before 200 assembled nobles in the palace's council chamber. Helena had arranged everything: the witnesses, the testimony, even the cathedral bells that would ring if the council accepted the evidence against Harold. 13 years ago, Pemberton's voice shook but held, I watched King Edmund Wayne die choking on his own blood, while Harold Bradley stood over him with an empty vial. I watched Queen Isabel beg for her daughter's life. I watched Harold order guards to search for an 11-year-old child so he could murder her. I stayed silent out of fear. I've lived in that shame for 13 years. Today, I speak truth. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Harold sat on his throne with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, letting the old man finish his testimony. Lady Ashcroft witnessed it as well, Pemberton continued. She will corroborate. Lord Philip Greymont moved with the speed of a man who'd practiced this moment. His dagger found Lady Ashcroft's back before anyone could react, driving between her ribs with precision born of desperation. She fell without a sound, her testimony dying with her. Lies, Harold declared into the horrified silence, the delusions of a man seeking attention in his declining years. I have proof. Pemberton pulled Dr. Whitmore's letter from his robes. The royal physician's testimony, written before his execution. A forgery, Harold interrupted smoothly. Easily proven if we had the physician here to verify his hand, but he died of plague 13 years ago. Did he not, Lord Pemberton? How convenient that your evidence comes from the dead. The council split. Some nobles believed Pemberton. Others trusted Harold's smooth denials. Princess Isabel stood and delivered a speech about her father's necessary actions to save the kingdom from weak leadership, her voice clear and convincing. The chamber descended into chaos, nobles drawing swords, taking sides, accusations flying like daggers, and through it all, the cathedral bells stayed silent. The testimony had failed. Harold's counter-move was brilliant in its simplicity. I offer 10,000 gold pieces for proof that Princess Natalie Wayne lives. Bring me this ghost that haunts Lord Pemberton's imagination. If she exists, let her present herself. If not, he let the implication hang. If Natalie wasn't found, it proved Pemberton was lying. Thomas pulled Natalie from the chamber's shadows where she'd been watching, his arm bleeding from a guard's sword. We need to move, now. They ran through streets that hunted them, past patrols that searched every shadow, through underground passages that reeked of centuries of secrets. Thomas's wound bled steadily, leaving a trail that pursuing soldiers followed like hounds on a scent. Helena stayed behind to coordinate what remained of the resistance network, her face gray with exhaustion and blood loss. Get her to the cathedral crypt. Get her to midnight. That's all that matters now. Natalie and Thomas reached the cathedral as the sun set on her 24th year of life. Hours until midnight. Hours until everything changed. They descended into crypts that had witnessed 400 years of coronations, into chambers where her ancestors' bones lay in silent witness. "I'll keep watch above," Thomas said, pressing a sword into her hands despite his wound. "Whatever happens at midnight, make it count." Natalie stood alone in the coronation chamber as the minutes crawled toward her birthday. The walls were carved with the history of her bloodline, kings and queens who'd ruled justly, who'd made mistakes, who died believing their legacy would endure. She touched the ancient Wayne crest carved into stone and felt it warm beneath her fingers. Midnight struck with the cathedral bells tolling above, and the blood mark behind her left ear began to burn. It started as warmth, then heat, then fire that didn't consume but transformed. Silver light spread from the crown-shaped mark across her skin, flowing through her veins like liquid starlight. Power flooded into her, not magic in the traditional sense, but connection. She could feel every stone in the palace, every oath ever sworn to the Wayne crown, every law written in Valdrin's name, every lie told by the man who'd stolen her throne. She could sense Harold in the throne room above, his fear sharp and bitter, could feel his guards around him, uncertain and afraid, could sense 300 people throughout the palace, all of them suddenly compelled to move toward the throne room by power older than memory. "The throne knows who I am," Natalie whispered, her voice echoing with supernatural resonance. "The stones remember the oaths sworn to my family. Every false word Harold has spoken for 13 years burns in my veins like fire. I am Natalie Elise Wayne, first of her name, rightful queen of Valdrin, and this kingdom will hear truth, even if I have to drag them to it through blood and stone." The palace began to shake. Ancient Wayne crests carved into walls throughout the building blazed with golden light. Every person inside felt an overwhelming compulsion to witness what came next. Servants, guards, nobles, all of them flowing toward the throne room like blood returning to a beating heart. Thomas appeared at the crypt entrance, his eyes wide with awe and terror. The entire palace is moving to the throne room. Every guard, every noble, every servant. It's like they can't help themselves. "They can't," Natalie replied, her blood mark blazing with golden light that painted the ancient stones in shades of dawn. "The throne demands witnesses. It's time Harold Bradley faced every lie he's ever told." The power was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Natalie could feel every person in the palace, 300 souls drawn by magic older than memory toward the throne room where Harold waited. She could sense his fear, sharp and bitter. She could feel his daughter Isabel standing beside him, and something else. Something wrong. Isabel wasn't afraid. She was anticipating, waiting, as if everything was going according to her plan, not Natalie's. She didn't know yet that Harold had one final card to play, and it wore her mother's name. The palace hallways had been empty when she'd lived here as a child, vast and echoing with her laughter as she chased her cousins through marble corridors. Now they were packed with bodies, all moving in the same direction, drawn by power. They couldn't name and magic they didn't understand. Nobles in their finery, guards in armor, servants in simple clothes, all of them flowing toward the throne room like blood returning to a wounded heart. And at the center of it all, Natalie Wayne walked with her blood mark blazing gold, feeling every heartbeat of the 300 people she was about to force to witness the truth. Thomas limped beside her, his wounded arm bound with cloth, already soaking through with blood. "Whatever happens in there, I'm with you," he said quietly. "My father died believing in you. I won't dishonor that by abandoning you now." Natalie squeezed his hand briefly, the only acknowledgement she could manage while power surged through her veins like lightning seeking ground. The throne room doors stood open ahead, and through them she could see the obsidian throne where Harold Bradley sat with the rigid posture of a man trying to project confidence, while terror ate him from the inside out. 300 people compressed into the throne room, pressed together by supernatural compulsion they couldn't resist. Harold's elite guards stood positioned around the throne, their hands on their sword hilts, but their faces uncertain. They could feel the wrongness in the air, the sense that everything they'd believed for 13 years was about to shatter like glass beneath a hammer. On a balcony overlooking the throne room, Helena Greymont watched from behind the bars of a cell where Harold had imprisoned her after the council chamber disaster. Her face was pale with blood loss, but her eyes burned with fierce hope. Lord Pemberton stood among the assembled nobles, Dr. Whitmore's letter clutched in his trembling hands. Other resistance members were scattered throughout the crowd, blacksmiths and merchants and deserter soldiers, all of them drawn here by magic, but staying by choice. The throne itself glowed with golden light that pulsed in time with Natalie's heartbeat. Ancient Wayne crests, carved into the walls, blazed like captured stars. The air crackled with energy that made everyone's skin prickle and their breath come short. Natalie walked through the crowd, and they parted automatically, unable to do otherwise. She was no longer the bent seamstress who delivered banners just days ago. She stood tall now, royal in bearing despite her threadbare clothes. The blood mark behind her left ear blazed like a captured sun, visible to everyone. Her mother's sapphire ring gleamed on her finger, worn openly for the first time in 13 years. "The lost heir," someone whispered. "She survived," another voice breathed. "Princess Natalie." Her name rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water, spreading outward until everyone knew who stood before them. Not a ghost, not a legend. The rightful Queen of Valdrin, returned to reclaim what had been stolen in blood and lies. She stopped in the center of the throne room, facing Harold across a distance that felt both vast and intimate. The supernatural energy crackling between them made the torchlight flicker and dance. Harold stood from the obsidian throne with forced confidence that fooled no one. His face was haggard, aged beyond his 47 years by paranoia and guilt that had eaten at him for 13 years. But his voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of a man who'd ruled through fear and wouldn't surrender it easily. "You claim to be Natalie Wayne," he said, each word carefully measured. "Show me proof beyond glowing skin and old jewelry. Show me." He gestured sharply. Guards moved, bringing forward a figure in a white gown that seemed to glow in the supernatural light. Princess Isabel Bradley, 16 years old and beautiful, looked more like a sacrifice being led to an altar than a hostage being used as leverage. Harold's hand moved with practiced efficiency, drawing a knife and pressing it to his daughter's throat. The blade caught the light, sharp and ready. "Come, closer, and I kill her," Harold announced. "Try to take my throne, and innocent blood spills first." The crowd gasped. Nobles shouted condemnation. Even some of Harold's own guards looked sick at the sight of their king threatening his own daughter. Thomas started forward with murder in his eyes, but Natalie held up a hand to stop him, because she'd seen something the crowd hadn't. Isabel's eyes meeting hers across the distance, and there was no fear in them, only calculation, only anticipation, only the look of someone whose plan was finally reaching its culmination. "You think I'm an innocent fool?" Isabel's voice rang out clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the throne room. I'm my father's daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Harold looked surprised, the knife wavering slightly at his daughter's throat. "I've known for 3 years that my father murdered King Edmund and Queen Isabel Wayne," Isabel continued, her voice steady and certain. "I found documents in his private study, detailed accounts, Dr. Whitmore's original testimony before it was hidden, letters between my father and Lord Philip Greymont planning the coup." She pushed away from Harold, stepping forward with the knife still in his hand. But she moved as if the blade didn't exist, as if her father's threat meant nothing. "I wasn't horrified," Isabel said, addressing the crowd now rather than Natalie. "I was impressed. The plague gave him opportunity, and he took it. That's leadership. That's strength. She pointed at Natalie. "You hid in the slums for 13 years while my father built roads, expanded trade, made Valdrin powerful. What right do you have to destroy that because of old blood and ancient laws?" The revelation hit the crowd like a physical blow. The innocent princess everyone had loved, the charitable girl who'd visited orphanages and distributed food to the poor, had been helping her father hunt for the lost heir, had been complicit in maintaining 13 years of lies. "She's been helping me search for you," Harold said, something like pride mixing with his terror. "Every charitable visit to the slums. She was looking for rumors of silver eyes, of girls who didn't quite fit. My daughter understands what you never could. The throne belongs to those strong enough to hold it." "Kill them both!" Thomas shouted from the crowd, his voice raw with betrayal. "They're monsters, both of them." The blood mark pulsed with power that made the throne room shake. Natalie could feel it, the rage demanding payment, 3 years of grief crying out for vengeance, the supernatural power that could collapse the palace and bury everyone beneath stone and broken promises. It would be so easy, so justified, so exactly what Harold deserved. But her mother's dying words echoed in her mind. "Stay quiet, stay hidden, promise me." Her mother hadn't meant hide forever. She'd meant survive to do what's right, survive to be better than the people who destroyed them, survive to break the cycle rather than perpetuate it. "You murdered my parents," Natalie said, her voice carrying to every corner of the throne room, amplified by the blood mark's power. "You've ruled through fear for 13 years. You've corrupted laws, stolen wealth, and threatened to unleash plague on innocent people. By every law of Valdrin, you deserve execution." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the crowd. Harold's face showed relief. He'd expected death, and here it came. At least it would be quick. "But I'm not here for vengeance," Natalie continued. "I'm here for justice. Put down the knife. Release your daughter." She glanced at Isabel. "Or whatever this performance is. Face trial before these witnesses, before the kingdom. Let your crimes be heard, your defenses spoken, your fate decided by law, not by blood, not by power, but by the same justice system you've corrupted." The throne room erupted in shocked murmurs. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Not the crowd, not Harold, not even Thomas, who stared at Natalie as if she'd lost her mind. "Show them you're more than a murderer," Natalie pressed. "Show them you believe in the kingdom you claim to have saved, or prove that everything I say about you is true, that you're a coward who only holds power through violence and fear." The trap was perfect and inescapable. If Harold killed Isabel, he was a monster before 300 witnesses. If he surrendered to trial, the evidence would condemn him. If he ordered his guards to kill Natalie, the blood mark's power would make them feel the wrongness of the act. They might refuse to obey. Princess Isabel stood frozen, the knife still at her throat, staring at Natalie with an expression that had shifted from calculation to something else. Confusion, maybe even doubt. "Father," she said slowly, her voice no longer steady, "I've stood beside you believing strength matters more than law. I've justified your crimes because I thought the kingdom was better for them." She pushed away from him completely now, stepping toward Natalie with the knife no longer touching her skin. "But in this moment, I see what you really are, and what she is." Tears began streaming down Isabel's face, as if the weight of 3 years of complicity had finally broken through her carefully constructed ideology. "She offers you mercy you don't deserve. She offers you law when you expect revenge. If you kill me to keep power, you prove that everything you taught me about strong leadership was a lie." Harold stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, or perhaps seeing himself reflected in her eyes and not liking what he found there. The knife trembled in his hand. "You're calling me a coward," he whispered. "I'm calling you a father," Isabel replied, her voice breaking. "Be the man you taught me to admire, or admit that everything was built on sand." The knife clattered too, the floor with a sound that echoed like thunder in the absolute silence. Harold's hands went to his face, and when he lowered them, tears streaked his cheeks. "I killed them," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the throne room through some trick of acoustics or supernatural amplification. "Edmund and Isabel Wayne. I used the plague as cover for my coup. I searched for 13 years for their daughter because I knew that without her confirmed death, my claim was illegal. I've lived in fear every day that the truth would surface." His voice broke completely. I am what she says I am." The bloodmark's power surged through Natalie like lightning through storm clouds. Every person in the throne room felt the truth of Harold's confession, not through his words alone, but through ancient magic that made truth and lies physically tangible. It was like tasting something bitter or sweet, like feeling heat or cold, undeniable and absolute. Harold Bradley was a confessed murderer and usurper. There could be no doubt, no debate, no rationalization. 300 witnesses had felt the truth in their bones. The guards lowered their weapons. They couldn't fight against what they felt was right, what their very souls recognized as truth. One by one, nobles dropped to their knees, not to Harold, but to Natalie. The throne flared with golden light that washed across the room like dawn breaking after endless night. Throughout the palace, Wayne crests glowed in response, the land itself acknowledging its rightful ruler. Harold collapsed to his knees, broken and sobbing. Isabel stood alone between her father and Natalie, caught between the ideology she'd embraced and the truth she could no longer deny. Thomas and the resistance fighters moved to secure the exits, though no one tried to flee. Everyone was transfixed by what they'd witnessed. Natalie stood before the throne that had been her birthright, feeling the weight of 300 gazes upon her. The crown sat where Harold had left it, gleaming in the supernatural light that pulsed from the ancient stones. She could take it now, could claim what was hers by blood and magic and law. But as she looked at Harold, broken, kneeling, defeated, she thought of 13 years in the slums, thought of families destroyed by his harsh laws, thought of orphans created by his policies, thought of the cycle of blood that had ruled Valdrin for too long. The crowd waited for her to pronounce sentence. Thomas was shouting for execution. The nobles expected justice through death. Even Isabel, standing alone and uncertain, seemed resigned to watching her father die. But Natalie didn't reach for the crown. Not yet. "Imprison him," she said quietly. "There will be a public trial. Evidence, witnesses, law. That's the kingdom I'm going to build." And in Harold's eyes, she saw something worse than fear of death. She saw the knowledge that he would live to watch everything he'd built crumble under the rule of the girl he'd tried to kill. They called it the trial of the century, though Valdrin had only existed for 400 years, and most of its citizens couldn't remember a time when justice meant anything other than the king's word, made final by executioner's blade. But in the 3 days since Harold Bradley's confession in the throne room, the confession that 300 witnesses swore they'd felt in their very bones was true, something had shifted in the kingdom. People dared to speak openly in market squares. Families gathered to debate law and justice and what it meant to break a cycle of violence. And in the public square, where a hastily constructed platform stood, 10,000 citizens gathered to watch Princess Natalie Wayne decide what kind of ruler she would become. The platform had been built in the center of Valdrin's main square, visible from every direction. Wooden benches for nobles, standing room for commoners, guards positioned not to intimidate but to maintain order. The atmosphere felt more like a gathering than an execution ground, though the gallows stood ready nearby, just in case. Harold Bradley was brought forward in chains that rattled with each step. He looked smaller than Natalie remembered from the throne room, diminished by 3 days in a cell and the weight of his confession. His daughter Isabel walked behind him, unchained but with guards at her elbows. She'd requested to be present, though no one was certain if that was courage or penance. The Archbishop, the same one who'd blessed Harold's false reign 13 years ago, stood at the center of the platform. He looked older and more uncertain now, but when he spoke, his voice carried across the square with the authority of someone who'd finally found his courage. "We gather today for justice," he announced. "Not vengeance, not expedience. Justice as our laws intended it, with evidence, with witnesses, with the chance for defense and truth." The trial began with systematic precision. Lord Pemberton read Dr. Whitmore's letter aloud, his voice shaking but steady. Every detail of that terrible night laid bare before 10,000 witnesses. The poison, nightshade kiss, the timeline, plague used as cover, the witnesses who'd stayed silent for 13 years. Palace servants testified about plague victims they'd never seen, bodies burned before anyone could examine them. Financial records were presented showing Harold's embezzlement, funds diverted to his personal coffers and to pay the Crimson Fangs for their silence. Military reports detailed necessary force against dissidents, which meant murder of anyone who questioned Harold's legitimacy. Helena Greymont, freed from her cell and bandaged but alive, testified as the leader of the Crown's Memory Resistance Network. She spoke of 13 years watching Harold's corruption deepen, of waiting for the lost heir, of the hope that had kept them fighting when everything seemed lost. Harold sat, through it all, with chains on his wrists and resignation on his face. He didn't deny, didn't defend, just listened as every crime he'd committed was catalogued for the kingdom to hear. When the evidence had been presented, the Archbishop turned to those who'd asked to speak. "Let justice be heard from all voices," he said, "for this decision affects us all." Thomas Ashford Jr. stepped forward first, his wounded arm still bandaged, his face carved from the same determination that had marked his father. His voice carried across the square with the weight of 13 years of grief. "My father died getting Princess Natalie to safety," he said. "He believed in a kingdom ruled by law. Harold Bradley murdered him in cold blood and called it maintaining order. I demand execution for my father, for the hundreds who died resisting tyranny. Blood demands blood." The crowd erupted in agreement. "Death! Death! Death!" The chant built like a wave, 10,000 voices crying for vengeance that felt like justice. Then Isabel Bradley stepped forward, tears streaming down her face, and the crowd fell silent. "My father is a murderer," she said, her voice breaking. "I cannot deny what I know to be true. I've known for 3 years. I helped him. I justified his crimes because I believed strength mattered more than law. I was wrong." She wiped her eyes with hands that trembled. "But he is still my father. I grew up loving him, believing him to be a hero. That doesn't excuse his crimes, but he's all I have left. I ask for mercy, not for his sake, for mine, because I'm not ready to watch my father die, even if he deserves it." The crowd quieted, uncertain. The girl they'd loved for her charity work stood before them, admitting complicity, begging for the life of a murderer, and somehow her honesty made them hesitate. Helena spoke next, her voice tired but firm. "I watched my queen die. I spent 13 years in silent resistance waiting for this day. I wanted vengeance, dreamed of it. But I've learned vengeance doesn't bring them back. It only creates more orphans, more pain, more cycles." Lord Pemberton's turn came last. "I stayed silent for 13 years. That silence makes me complicit. If we execute Harold without trial, without process, we become what he was. Executing kings without law, that's how this started. That's how the Wayne line nearly ended. If we want something different, we have to choose something different." Then Harold was given the chance to speak. He stood on the platform with chains rattling, looking out at 10,000 faces that held his fate in their collective judgment. No defiance remained in him, just exhaustion. "I saw an opportunity and took it," he said quietly. "The plague was real but minor. I exaggerated it. I murdered my brother and his wife because they trusted me, and that made them weak. I hunted their daughter for 13 years because I knew my claim was illegal without her confirmed death." His voice grew stronger, as if confession was its own form of release. "I built roads. I expanded trade. I made Valdrin powerful, but I also created orphans, imprisoned dissenters, ruled through fear. I told myself the ends justified the means. They didn't." He looked directly at Natalie, standing at the edge of the platform. "If you execute me, you'll be doing what I did, trading one life for what you think is a better future. If you imprison me, you'll be doing something I never had the strength to do, choosing law over expedience. Either way, my legacy is ash." The square fell silent. 10,000 people waiting for Princess Natalie Wayne to step forward and pronounce sentence. She stood before them in a simple dress, not yet crowned, not yet officially queen, but already carrying the weight of every decision to come. The blood mark behind her ear glowed faintly, visible to everyone, a reminder that when she spoke truth, they would feel it in their bones. "Harold Bradley," her voice carried, across the square without needing to shout. "You are guilty of regicide, of usurpation, of attempted genocide, and of 13 years of tyrannical rule. The law demands your death." The crowd erupted in approval. Finally, justice. Blood for blood. The cycle continuing as it always had. "But I am ending today the cycle of blood that has ruled this kingdom for too long." The square went silent so fast it felt like the world had stopped breathing. "You will spend the remainder of your life imprisoned in the same cells where you kept political prisoners. You will witness the kingdom prospering under lawful rule. You will see your daughter grow into the woman she could have been without your corruption. You will live with your crimes every day as I have lived with their consequences." Natalie's gaze swept across the 10,000 faces staring at her in shock. "And every person in this kingdom will know. We are not ruled by vengeance anymore. We are ruled by law. Even murderers get trials. Even tyrants get justice. That is the kingdom I will build." The crowd erupted, not in unified approval, but in chaos. Some cheered, others protested, demanding blood. Arguments broke out across the square as people debated whether mercy was strength or weakness. Thomas Ashford Jr. stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. "My father died for you. He deserves vengeance." Natalie met his eyes, and her voice was gentle but firm. "Your father died for justice, for a kingdom ruled by law, not blood. Executing Harold would honor his death with more death, showing that even murderers face trials. That's the kingdom he died to protect." For a long moment, Thomas stood frozen. Then slowly, painfully, he dropped to one knee. "I accept your judgment, Your Majesty, even though it tears at me." One by one, others in the crowd began to kneel. Not everyone. Not even most, but enough. Enough to show that Natalie's choice, as revolutionary and difficult as it was, had changed something fundamental in the kingdom's soul. Harold was led away to his cell. Isabel followed, not as a prisoner, but as someone uncertain of her place in this new order. The crowd dispersed, still arguing, still debating, but thinking about justice in ways they never had before. 2 weeks later, the cathedral was packed for the first lawful coronation in 13 years. Nobles in their finest clothes, commoners in their best, resistance fighters honored as heroes, given places of prominence. The archbishop conducted the ceremony with full traditional rites, speaking words that hadn't been spoken since Natalie's father was crowned. The council had been reconstituted with new members, not just nobles but representatives from merchants, craftsmen, even the farmers whose labor fed the kingdom. Thomas Ashford Jr. stood in his father's armor as the new captain of the guard, completing the legacy his father had died to begin. As the crown was placed on Natalie's head, retrieved from where Harold had hidden it, cleaned and restored, the blood mark behind her ear flared one final time. Throughout Valdren, Wayne crests carved into buildings, bridges, and monuments glowed briefly with golden light, the land itself acknowledging its rightful ruler. Natalie spoke the ancient oath, her voice carrying through the cathedral. I, Natalie Elise Wayne, swear to rule not through fear, but through law, to see justice done even when vengeance would be easier, to remember that 13 years in the slums taught me more about my people than a lifetime in a palace ever could. I wear this crown not because of blood alone, but because I've earned the right to serve. The cathedral erupted in cheers. Outside, across the kingdom, bells rang in celebration. New laws were proclaimed: no execution without trial, no imprisonment without evidence, no power without accountability. The changes had begun. Harold Bradley watched the coronation from his cell window, seeing the crown placed on the head of the girl he'd tried to kill, witnessing the beginning of everything he'd feared. Isabel Bradley, given the choice of exile or service, chose to study law. "I want to help fix what my father broke," she said, "even if it takes the rest of my life." Dr. Whitmore's family was publicly honored, his name cleared, his sacrifice remembered. The seamstresses from Natalie's shop attended the coronation as honored guests, with Martha given a place near the front. Helena Graymont became chief royal advisor, her husband's betrayal acknowledged, but her loyalty proven beyond doubt. That evening, as the sun set over Valdren, Queen Natalie Wayne stood on the palace balcony looking out at Ashford slums in the distance. The place that had sheltered her, taught her, and showed her what truly mattered. Helena joined her, moving carefully with her wounds still healing. "You surprised them. They expected vengeance." "Vengeance is easy," Natalie replied. "Justice is hard. Building something better than what came before, that's the hardest thing of all." Thomas appeared on her other side, his armor gleaming in the sunset light. "The people are calling you the just queen. It's spreading through every district." Natalie smiled sadly, touching her mother's sapphire ring. "They called Harold the Savior King once. Titles are easy, living up to them. That's the real work." She looked out at the kingdom, her kingdom now, and thought of everything that had led to this moment. Her parents' murder, 13 years of hiding, the seamstress shop, the people who'd formed a human wall to protect her, Thomas's father dying to save an 11-year-old girl, Helena waiting 13 years for hope to return. "They thought killing my parents would kill our legacy," she said quietly. "They thought a lost heir would stay lost. They thought power came from crowns and thrones. But I learned the truth in the slums of Ashford. Real power comes from the people you serve. Real strength is choosing justice over vengeance. Real leadership is breaking cycles instead of perpetuating them." The sun set over Valdren, a kingdom beginning to heal, a people learning to trust law over fear, a queen ready to do the hard work of ruling justly. Natalie turned back toward her throne room, where a stack of petitions waited, where decisions needed to be made, where the real work of building a better kingdom would begin. The blood mark behind her ear glowed faintly, a reminder that she was guardian of law, not tyrant above it. Years later, historians would write of Queen Natalie the Just, who chose mercy over vengeance and law over blood. They would write of Harold Bradley, who lived 20 more years in prison, witnessing the kingdom prosper under the rule he'd tried to corrupt. They would write of Princess Isabel, who became the kingdom's greatest legal scholar and helped rewrite the laws that prevented future usurpation. And they would write of Thomas Ashford, captain of the guard, who protected the queen his father died to save. But the seamstresses of Ashford remember something different. They remember Nell, who shared her bread when they had none, who mended dresses with gentle hands, who taught their children to read by candlelight. And they remember that justice, like thread, is strongest when woven together.
So what do you think? If you were in Natalie's position, with the power to destroy everyone who'd hurt you, could you have chosen mercy? It's easy to say yes when it's just a story, but when the pain is yours, when the loss is real, when vengeance is within reach, that's when the choice becomes impossible. And maybe that's what makes it worth making. I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if Natalie's choice to break the cycle, instead of perpetuate it, resonated with you, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear that transformation is possible. Subscribe if you want more stories about people choosing to be better than their worst moments. And don't forget to turn on that notification bell so you catch the next one. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And remember, you always have a choice about what kind of story you write with your life.